Welcome to Storycomic Presents, where we interview amazing storytellers and artists. This is episode 149. I'm your host, Barney Smith of Storycomic.com, and we're excited to have with us the creative team behind the Vermont Humor book, I Could Hardly Keep From Laughing, author Bill Mears and illustrator Don Hooper. Don and Bill, how you doing?
Oh, we're in better. We'd be in jail or the logins feeling so good.
So this isn't your first collaboration the two of you worked together on, correct?
Well, yes and no. I mean, we actually collaborated on a book when it really got its origin because we met in the legislature in 1985, and then I was doing books with Frank Bryan, a UVM professor, and somewhere along the line we decided that we were going to do a book about legislative and political humor. And by that time, I knew the world did not yet know what a great cartoonist Don was. So we got him to illustrate this book, which was called Out of Order, and so he was a known commodity. And then when Jeff Danzer and I did a book about Vermont and Trump called The Full Vermonti, Don we hired Don to do a piece in that, and we. Then, I don't know, you tell the rest of the story.
Oh, I asked Bill, hey, what are you going to do next? He's already got 17 books in the hopper, and some of them are pretty darn good on beer and the U.S. Marines and so on, a whole variety. I mean, beekeeping, he's got the history of beekeeping, came out a year ago. What are you going to do next, Billy? And he says, I'm going to do a book on, and then he scratches his head, Vermont humor, but only if you'll illustrate it. So he bagged me. And I had been noodling. I've been really my obsession is climate change and how we're going to get out of the mess that we're creating. And I can't find much humor in that. So he gave me an assignment that was really fun. And for a couple of years, we kind of gnawed on each other and played off of each other's ideas. He collected the the stories, and I tried to draw them.
Yeah, and I think, seriously, it really helped that we liked each other, and I think, we did feed off each other in this humorous but also serious way, and I think it has a real history, which is what I'm really trained as a historian, but it had Don's very quick graphic wit, but at the end I allowed him to have an entire chapter for himself, which he could preach with his art and get all this climate change bullshit onto the pages. So it worked out great, and we're delighted.
I was just thinking about Billy charges you an arm and a leg for just about anything. So. But then he'll give you back a hand. That's your change. Barney, you're wearing your Superman shirt.
Yeah. See, I bet it's my evening wear here. So talk to us a bit about that, Bill. So was this concept of this book, was this an idea that you've been stewing on for a while, or is this something that kind of hit you as a revelation that the history of Vermont humor hasn't been told yet?
Well, it's the logical and correct question, and I think as I've done books over my life, they do grow on you. I mean, you don't have I think when I did a book on Paris Island, that was all fully formed, but this was growing partly because no one had really shaped. There's a lot of Vermont humor books. I mean, I participated in 4 of them, right. But there'd never been one that really tried to look at the evolution of humor in still a light way. I mean, it's not an academic work. But it does have sections and my wife gave us the chapter titles for the chapter about the coming of Flatlanders first, and so that chapter came to play, and then the next well, really the one about the Flatlanders is came to stay, because that was in the 60s. So we are trying to have blocks of humor, but not where it doesn't work. We don't push it, but we are trying to get the reader to think, how does humor within a state and a culture evolve? I guess that's as intellectual as I've ever been in trying to describe this, because we didn't just want to have a joke book. That's tiresome.
And so Don, when you were, I think you were tasked to do at least 100 illustrations for the book.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Now talk about just the creative aspects of that. Did you have kind of free reign? Did you tell Bill, I want to do this many, or
no, I'd produce a couple of pictures and he'd say, oh, this one's better than that or whatever. But there are a number of themes that recur in there. So it came to play. That was because we became known as a ski mecca, and then foliage crept in, and so you've got 2 seasons there, the winter and then the fall. And I had drawn a picture of a guy. Actually, it was a representative in the legislature named Oreste Valsin-Giacomo, and he's standing there looking very Italian and touristy with a camera hanging from his neck, and he's got his arm around a haystack. And it's so hay as a tourist attraction was the caption on that. So anyway, we developed 5 pictures that have to do with Vermont's 5 seasons. The one about one season, of course, is predictable. Some guy pushing this car that is absolutely way over its rocker panels in mud. And so I'd hack away at it, and Bill would say, this one's better than that. And we threw them in. But I think the genius that Bill did in this was when we abandoned the idea of calling it a history and calling it a collection. So then it didn't have to have quite the same tight rigor. But he goes back and he draws on the work of Alan Foley and David Smith and a guy named Davis, and he pulls all of them in. So it's legit in terms of really decent information. And then the end chapters are they go from Danny Gore and the logger, Rusty DeWeese and Al Bowright, and move right into some present day stand-up women on the stage who are fabulous. You take over here.
Well, yeah, I mean, it was really I think probably Dan Bowles of 7 Days, who wrote a wonderful article maybe 3 years ago about women comedians, stand-up comics in Vermont, and about the Vermont Comedy Club, and people like Tina Frimmel and
Natalie Miller.
Well, Natalie Miller, and it was so it was so well written and so vivid that I went to Hooper. I said, look, we've got to have really an entire chapter devoted to these people, to this era of how Vermont humor has changed. Certainly for the better, but it is distinctively different from even 30 years ago or 50 years ago or 100 years ago. And so we said we've got to have one of a chapter. So then we mixed. I think we mixed. Someone else has read or heard every story we've got in it. There's nothing original except for Hooper's cartoons, which is why his name's first. I mean, he's doing all the heavy lifting. I mean, all I have to do is scribble a few words.
What a crop.
So as you kind of brought it up, is like, so you've the two of you have been involved in Vermont Humor and being a part of the works for well on 30 years, more than that right now, or since the 80s is, because I believe Out came out, 89, I think?
Well, Out came out in 87.
87, okay.
The Goat Book came out in 83, and the Out of Order came out in 90 or 91.
Okay. Now,
the goat book, just to take a parent. Mears and I went to the legislature the same year in 1985, and this book was just making him famous. And the Free Press did. He sold almost 50,000 copies. Real Vermonters don't milk goats, and I'm a goat milker. I'm an honest to God goat milker. I had a route that had lasted for 10 years down to Whole Foods. It was then called Bread and Circus down in Boston, Hanover Co-op, and all these places. And fresh goat milk. A lot of money was coming in, but a lot of money was going out for fence posts and feed. And so I was bearing the brunt. I show up at the legislature for innocent freshman. Everybody says, "I'm real for Hooper, you poor." It's just ruined any chance of credibility you got. Trying to, yeah. So that's where we formed that friendship. And oddly, there was a little bit of not a standoff, but we treated each other with mutual deference and respect initially, and then we became friends.
Yeah, well, it was fun because there was a reporter from the Free Press named Debbie Sline who wrote an article about a month or two into the first session, and said, well, here are the 4 people that are really go-getters among the freshmen in the legislature. And Don was one of them. And then they had 2 or 3 people who were sort of also Rands, the second team. Well, I was in that group. So he rubbed my face in that diminishment of prestige.
And so because of that, have you seen, as you mentioned, and I'm wondering if there's a parallel, if it's, if it goes along, what's the word I'm looking for? Correlation is not causation, or causation is not correlation. I'm wondering if it's where you've seen the evolution of Vermont humor has also gone with the evolution of the loss of a native Vermont accent. Have you seen that Vermont humor has evolved over time based off of how Vermont is less insular as it was, say, 40 years ago?
That's a great observation. I agree with that. And the loss of the accent is, I don't know whether you'd even know a Vermont accent necessarily in Chittenden County, but where I live in Orange County, right in central Vermont, it's so evident. Some people put one on in order to seem more legit. I think the humor, to some degree, I'll give you an example. Grandma, you think it's going to rain? Well, if it don't, it's going to be a long dry spell. Now that humor is so dry that it honestly took me a couple of decades to get it. I couldn't even crack a smile. It was just so deadpan. So I don't think you could get away with that anymore. But that's the origin of this dry, understated, wonderful Vermont humor. Danziger, what does he say about it? You almost had to be there.
You almost have to be there, right? And I was going to get the book. Meanwhile, you talk.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of another one in that vein that is really it's just gentle, it's reassuring, it's comforting. It's so Vermont that downcountry people actually, I think, don't get it. They really say, "Oh gosh, these guys are pretty behind the times," So there's nothing flamboyant about it, and it's one of the gorgeous things, especially in this divisive world we live in right now, is it's not mean. There's nothing mean about it. Even the comeuppance, which is a beauty, that is a genuine. It's in the Vermont DNA to pull a Flatlander out of a ditch on a snowy night, and he wants to give you $25. And the Vermonter, there's nothing that pleases him more than to say, no, Here we don't do that.
Right.
Thanks. I appreciate the gesture, but we don't. And it's it's a gorgeous scene when that occurs. What are you looking for?
Well, I was looking for Danziger's little paragraph there, and I was
Oh.
also looking for doggerel. Do you know where the doggerel
Oh,
thing is?
well, it's in the car.
So I think it was like, yeah, in the intro, it was talking about like kind of phrase it as rye and dry. Basically.
Yes, right.
Yeah.
Well,
And just in case nobody got it, we made up a little poem at the end of the book that unfortunately we can't find right now. That summarizes what it is about Vermont humor. What is Vermont humor?
Right. The work is you mentioned earlier is that you kind of Bill, you were the ultimate editor, I guess, on what Don's illustrations were. Basically, is that how that worked?
Well, I think it was genuinely. There were certainly that last chapter was the stuff that Don wanted to do, and essentially he wrote much of the text. But on the others, he had been for a year and a half, I think, before we started putting the book together. He would send us maybe a card, 3 or 4 or 5 cards a week. They'd come in from 716 Raleigh Road, Brookfield, in little envelopes, and they and my wife and I would sit with it. That would be our dessert to have it after dinner. We'd open up the cards and see what they were, and then we would judge them. And we'd have a pile that was large. I mean, the larger pile was the ones that were really good and keepers, and we would tell Don this or that, and we might even make a suggestion on sort of rearranging 1 or 2. And some of those ended up being in the book, and some of them were just good cards, because that's what he does. He writes cards, and then he has these wonderful names on the back of the cards. What do you call
all
them?
the different card companies?
Yeah, different card companies, all at the same address.
But the idea was, as I'm going through, we're both in our late 70s. Well, Billy's 80 years old now. And so we don't have forever to look forward to, and we're trying to live it up every single day. So I mean, there's one of these that asks, what's the difference between being unemployed, fired, being what do you call it, in not hibernation, but when you're trying to keep away from everybody when you've got COVID.
Quarantine?
Isolated.
Quarantine, yeah.
The difference between being fired, being in quarantine, being retired.
Yeah.
Well, from the moment you wake up in the morning, you're on the job.
Right.
In all of those cases. I mean, I'm now retired, and so I would think of all the different angles about how being retired is.
Right.
The other day, I read in an obituary, great blues singer said just before he died, he said, you should live every day as if it's your last. I said that to my wife, and she said, oh, I guess I don't have to take out the compost. There is so much rich, wonderful stuff right around us, and we're going through it every day.
Right.
You think of all the people that you know who've got birthdays, you want to send them a card. So there's.
So about your artwork, Don, how do you describe, like, are you a pen and paper kind of person, or are you do you sketch out your work first and you ink it over, or is it watercolor? How do you
it's pretty amateurish, and it's just fun to experiment. And I've always been a goofy drawer, and in fact years ago I hired a wonderful life drawing instructor for the community college called Joel, a guy named Billy Brower, to teach for CCV a number of years in a row. And he said, finally, I'm not teaching for you again until you take my course. And I took his course and it ruined my life because if I were to go through the rules that he taught me, I'd have been, anyway. So I've gotten comfortable with the fact that I can't draw and that it's just fun to hack around and express myself in first pencil, then I ink it in and add some color. Now they've got these wonderful colored pencils that if you add water to them, that they wash a little bit. So I'm learning it, and I'm learning a tremendous amount as I go along. And Billy gave me a lot more confidence in terms of, well, you know, guy is goofy as all get out, but it kind of works.
And so how did you, so that, I guess my next question for both of you is like, how did you decide to, you went through a different publishing route than you've done previously, correct?
Yeah. Well, this is, publishing has changed a lot since the first book that I published 55 years ago. And when you either had an agent or you didn't have, but you went really to New York if you wanted to get accepted by the big houses. And right. If you were lucky, you got an advance, and then they gave you a deadline and they did the design and did the marketing. Well, that's changed a lot. There used to be a company called Vantage Books, I think. And it was the one vanity press, the one where you would pay them X amount of money for X amount of copies, and they would do everything. Well, now the whole field is just blown up. So there's everything from that model back to New York, but New York is much less hospitable to the what they used to call the backlist, to the books that are only, they make a little money, they're partial sellers, but they're not blockbusters. And so now there is a number of houses where you can pay for part of it, you can pay for all of it, you can pay for a little bit. And Rootstock in Montpelier is an openly, what they call a hybrid press. And they have two levels of payment, depending upon how much of the infrastructure they construct for this, whether they do the design, how much advertising they might do. So that we chose them because, well, we'd heard nice things about them. And we frankly didn't want to sit around hoping against hope that either we would be able to get into a fancy place like New York or go search for an agent, which itself is a difficult problem, because the agents are in the business to make money. They're not in philanthropic organizations, so they want a completed manuscript to sell. So we've been very happy with this model where they did one level of editing, two level of editing, and the designer.
Yeah, two. Mm-hmm.
And they hired a guy we think is the best book designer in Vermont, maybe in the world. Mason
Singer.
Yeah.
At Laughing Bear Associates in Montpelier. He's really, really excellent. He made the book, which was sort of more of a scrapbook almost initially, and he gave it some genuine creative rigor, and it's a delightful thing. We ourselves like the thing.
Yeah, yeah. We open it up just randomly. We take it to bed to read ourselves to sleep on it. But he came up. He came up with the idea of having a square book, which was a little offbeat, and then he came up with the idea of dropping quotes into the what do they call
the margins?
Well, the margins, but the channel in the middle. Anyway, so that he would pull stuff out of text, and then he did the normal designer stuff of deciding about the size of the pictures and how they would go, and it's a marvelous book, and we're so pleased.
So he'd find a drawing and he'd insert it right there, but not very much. And then he found a picture of a bunch of cows that I had drawn. Said, heard any good ones lately? So Singer added his own little wit to the thing.
Yeah,
Okay.
he was great.
Yeah.
So this was, as you said earlier, this was a pandemic project then, correct?
Yeah.
But now it's interesting. The other night we were speaking at a wonderful retirement community called Wake Robin in Shelburne, Vermont, and they filled the place with 100 people. It was the first time that the residents of the community had been able to go out. They all had to wear masks in the audience, but we were entitled to do the performance without them. And we showed them a PowerPoint of, 25 slides or 50, I don't know. And they enjoyed it. We got through the pandemic because of this book a lot more easily than I think we would have if we hadn't had this distraction and the fun. I mean, it's really fun to collect these stories and then decide which ones are worthy to make it in. And,
I mean, everyone else was crying and we were giggling for the last 2 years.
So how did that work? Did you, because of COVID, how did you collect the stories? Did you already have them, or did you actually have to go out and do interviews, or how did that work?
We had them collected.
Okay.
I mean, we were collecting them from our previous books and from other people. We had to pay for the rights, but we had a good sense of where the best humor in each of these historic periods would be, and then we found more than we needed, and then it was just a matter of cutting them down and in a few cases rewriting them. But I was able to pull out. I wrote a piece about this professor at Middlebury named David Smith, who was an economics professor, and he's the only native-born Vermont professor at Middlebury, and he used to dress up in farmer gear. And he tells stories to the freshmen, who were coming from everywhere from China to New York. And so he would tell you. So I wrote this piece for the Free Press. And so we just pulled that out and used at least part of that as a section. And then we took stuff out of the Goat Book and put it in there. So we used stuff that we'd already done, and then we certainly went out and found other people stuff that had been published or said. We found a wonderful piece by Rusty DeWeese, the logger, about how to tell a joke that was in one of his 2 book scrawlings. And so we paid for the right to use that.
Right.
The material's all around you. So there was this juicy fight between the guy who made the T-shirt "Eat More Kale," and he got sued by Chick-fil-A because they had a slogan that was "Eat More Chicken," and he was trying to get a patent on something that would keep his trademark intact, and they sued him and took him to court. And of course, it was David Goliath's story. So we did a picture of a guy with a T-shirt that says "Eat More Kale." Well, our rival state, New Hampshire, what would that have? Eat more donuts. So we have a whole chapter poking fun at the differences between Live Free or Die and the Green Mountains and the White Mountains. We've got a shouting match across the Connecticut River, and 2 guys. One guy, Wally from Walpole, is shouting over. He says, "Hey, Brayton from Bellows Falls, you ought to come over and visit sometime. You know what we got over here? Oh my God, we got a legislature with 400 members, and we got all these McMansions, and we got." And finally, the guy from Bellows Falls, Brayton, yells back, "Hey, Wally, we got something over here you ought to see." "Oh, what's that? What do you got over there?" "We got enough." So sometimes you take a half, you take a joke like that, and it just fit in. So
Right.
anyway.
So with the book too, I'm just wondering, like, from like academically speaking, in a way, did you find that there is it just the home team feel to it, or is there an actual difference in humor that Vermont has as to, say, Northern New York or New Hampshire?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, I think historically, Vermont's been a dairy state, and its topography has contributed to a dairy economy for 130, 40 years. New York has had, at least Northern New York, has been mountains and tourism and prisons. And New Hampshire again is mountains and tourism and logs. And also, I mean, I think that the lack of a general sales, any sales or income tax in New Hampshire clouds people's minds, or at least they make a conscious choice. I'm not going to pay for government. And then they've had a deadening effect of the single newspaper, the Union Leader, over many years, 50, 60 years, has, it's a different place. I mean, I don't know how you'd get a lot of humor out of that.
Pretty good. Definitely done.
But so, and also too, because you're looking at it through like the 14 counties, but generically the 5 regions of Vermont, are there different? I mean, of course, Northeast Kingdom, but like, I'm just wondering if did you see that there's different types of Vermont humor based off of different parts of Vermont?
I don't
Yeah,
know.
I don't know. I think even if you live in a more modern and developed urban sort of, there's nothing in Vermont that's terribly urban, but 20 years ago, a fifth of the Vermont population lived in Chittenden County. Now it's a quarter. So people are coming in from elsewhere, and I think they really the notion, the trademark Vermont does mean something. We had a cheese company, and we changed the name in the middle of having it after 30 years. It started out as Vermont Butter and Cheese Company, and then we changed it when it became big enough so that it no longer needed to look big. We made it more artisanal by calling it Vermont Creamery. But the Vermont stayed because people really identify that with equality and back to land. There's an ambiance that comes out of that, and I think even people who live in and have kind of citified jobs around Vermont aspire to be considered genuine Vermonters. And we deal with that issue about whether it mattered if you were born in the state or whether you came in but you adopted the values of Vermont, which are, this really is a kind of celebration of Vermont's goodness and wholesomeness in many ways.
I would just go back to the regional humor question, because I think there's a maybe not one and not a humor in 5 different regions, but if you look at northern Vermont, and particularly Northeast Kingdom, Danny Gore, or Norm Lewis, his real name, made a career as a humorist by creating a fictional community called Apiaries Gore up in the kingdom, as he would say, and wonderful characters in it. He talked all about it, and he created a lot of his jokes about it as he made his perennial unsuccessful run for governor, which he did 10 times at least. So there's there's a humor in the sparseness, the
Mhm.
poverty, if you will, of the kingdom. And then just to the west in Lamoille County is Rusty DeWeese, who built upon David Budville's logger to create this with accent and all. So I would say that whether you call that northern Vermont region or just say that it is two people at least who are making a profession or made a profession of humor out of their particular location. That is true, because you can't imagine Rusty DeWeese doing this in Brattleboro.
Right.
Well, and bringing up Brattleboro, I mean, that's where people did come up from down country in droves. I don't know whether the strolling of the
Heifers
it would anyway. There's plenty of opportunities to kind of make fun of the innocent newcomer, the Flatlander who comes up, tries to be a Vermonter, and then ends up staying and is about as good a Vermonter as you can get in a lot of places.
Gooder.
So talking about the meat of the book, it's like over 200 pages, I believe, right? It's like, I think it's over 200 pages.
Every one of them is pregnant with humor and good humor.
How did you, so at what point was it just you, Bill, or was it you, Bill and Don, to kind of help shave it down? Because as you said, you had plenty of stuff. How hard was it, or how easy was it to say, all right, this isn't making the cut, this I like? And was there any bantering between the two of you?
We started with many children and figuring out which ones we were going to lop their heads off. Really hard, but we did. We're just brutal. It worked.
Oh, I think it you could almost say it was such a smooth process that I don't recall any kind of tense discussion. Do we leave this out? Do we put this in? Do we have to fill in this hole? I think it came together. I think there certainly were more drawings than we could have done. We could have had a book of 250 or 270 pages, but we felt that as you turn these pages, you want to have some pages could be double trucks without art, but most of them needed something. And this is where Mason was such a genius, because we gave him the freedom to choose from a variety of art that was free form art. I mean, it was not tied to a particular story. And I think with that kind of flexibility, it made a better book. And I don't think there was any magic about ending up with 200 pages, but it seemed like a good number. And is that a
I think that's really good. At one point, to use another cheese analogy, we were looking for a really good tasting cheese, but the price point had to be $9.90 or something like that. And the only way we could make that, since goat cheese was our business, we had to put a certain amount of cow's milk in. So it was our first hybrid cheese. It was called Cremant, and it came in at just $9.90. We needed something that would slip under that double-digit price tag in order to, because we already had a following, but it was a pretty elevated following. These were specialty cheeses that cost a lot, and we needed something that would start to get down what if you were a more ordinary person, you'd want to have on your cheese board. So in a way, the 200 pages worked perfectly. It wasn't too much. I think another 100 pages of this, and people would say, "Oh my God, I've had enough of this." and if it was only 150, they'd say, "Oh, well, they were a little stingy."
Yeah.
Were there any illustrations in there, Don, that you were kind of hoping that would have made the cut?
That would not make the cut?
That would have made the cut. Is there any
yeah.
that you...
And in fact, one of the people who was in the book did something kind of cool, I thought, after he came out with a book. His name is Alec Hastings. He had a book that's set on Lake Champlain during Prohibition. It's called Otter St. Ange and the Bootleggers. And it's a great young adult adventure novel. It really works. And when he finished with that, his daughters gave him a Christmas present, which was a correspondence course that where he would have to, they would dredge out of him, the correspondence course, all the family stories. So the daughters would learn what the family history was, who the uncles and aunts were, what the grandparents were about, and so on. And he did that, and he came up with a very sweet autobiography as a consequence that he just self-published or what have you recently. And so both Bill and I are a little bit inspired by that. You know, it feels kind of self-centered. It feels presumptuous, I think, to think that an ordinary person like me should write up my life or something. But I've got all these pictures I want to use. And most of them are me. There's a hapless character that we call Bubba Lugnut in some of the captions. And sometimes he's called Norbert, and other times he's called Ezra. But they're always the same kind of woebegone, hapless, fumbling character. And that's who it's really me. So I want to do that story and introduce my kids to my aunts and uncles and grandparents.
So what's next for you two?
Now that's the one for me is to
get the autobiography.
On the theme that an unexamined life isn't worth living. That's the sort of backdrop to it. And there's enough humor. I'm trying to think of things that aren't self-aggrandizing as much as lessons I've learned along the way in spite of myself. So there'll be as many lists of screw-ups as there are of trophies.
Right. What about you, Bill?
It's a secret.
Yeah, it's a secret. Oh, so you do have something in the hopper then,
He does. He's only got two more. No, one more. And then you get to 20.
I got to 20.
20 books. Yeah. Can you imagine?
Wow. And do you have, and it's a kind of similar in vein to your other humor books as well?
No.
No. Okay.
Well,
Bill is actually pretty well educated. Which you'll find out when he'll spring a word like
paraprostogians.
Paraprostogians.
Do you know what a paraprostogian is?
Well, I know what one prostogian is. I don't know what a pair of them is, but yeah.
Probably. No. There's one word, right?
That is
all right. Give him your example.
I'm just now.
No. Your example of paraprostogian, the parachute.
Oh yeah. So you don't need a parachute to skydive. You only need a parachute to skydive twice.
Yeah.
That's a parachute.
It's like the somebody said. I saw a joke the other day that said. Originally he was going to call it umbrella, but he hesitated.
Oh. Gosh.
So this is good. So we're at the top of the hour now. So, and I got to say, congratulations on producing a very well received book. We've seen, looking at it, we've got a lot of good reviews for it and everything. And so where can people, where's the easiest place for people to purchase this book?
Well, the easiest place is your local bookstore. If you can get it at Amazon, but we don't get any money out of that. And so
order it through your local bookstore.
Or you can just look up on the, and order directly from Rootstock. But the bookstore is the place to go.
And it looks like the hardcover is sold out so far. There's good.
That's right.
Yeah.
But or if you happen to know Bill or Don, that's us, write to us or call us up, and we'll send you one.
Yeah.
We'll sign it and inscribe it however you want.
Yeah.
We'll send it for free. I mean, we'll pay the postage.
Yeah.
Wow.
And we do a little bit better in that deal.
Yeah,
Okay.
we do a lot better than that deal. So yeah, if
The
you
soft
if
cover
you get
is
anybody calls you up and say, how do we get a hold of this guy? Give him our, and basically that's what we'll say is say, get a hold of us, send us a check, and we'll send you the book.
Perfect.
Sign.
Right.
But your local bookstore, support them.
Yeah.
Right. Good.
Good.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much, Don and Bill. I sure appreciate it. And so listen, Don, when you work on your autobiography, come back on the show. We'll talk about it. Same thing for you, Bill. Bill, come back on with when you're done with your top secret project. So
No, this has been a blast. Thanks so much for having us. Gosh, you've asked great questions, and so yeah, Don will certainly come back on the show.
Keep up your curiosity. Remember, it's not the destination; it's the journey.
that's right. That's right.
The last page in the book.
So Bill, there was like some ribbons or awards you have behind you. What are those?
Let's see. I don't know.
That's his Harvard diploma.
That's my Harvard diploma. I got marathon medals.
Okay.
He puts it up there just to remind himself that he did this stuff.
Yeah, it was private. I'm not.